Hello, everyone, and let's talk now about the second chapter, which is about the interface, which is a little bit more interesting than worrying about settings in Final Cut X, which we did last time. So here we're talking about the three main windows in Final Cut X, and I would like to apologize in advance if I ever use the wrong terms for any of these windows, because different editing applications have different terms for them, and sometimes old habits die hard. But anyway, this is the browser, and this is where you can browse through the various elements of your project. So whatever you bring into Final Cut, whatever you create in Final Cut, generally speaking, is going to show up here, and this is sort of where you manage your assets. We might say so: videos, pictures, sound, whatever comes in there. So you pull from here to bring things down into your timeline. Typically, is how it works. So that's the browser. And then we have the viewer here where you can see whatever you've got going on in your timeline. And so the viewer shows as I'm scrubbing through a video here, it updates. Or if I leave the mouse leaves the timeline, it will show wherever the playhead is. And one of the things that drives me nuts that video editors do sometimes is they feel a need to click and drag this playhead around. I'm not sure where that comes from, if there's other software somewhere that requires it, or if it's just human nature. That's probably human nature. If you want something to move, you have to pick it up and you have to move it. Well, not in the case of the playhead. If you want the playhead to be over here, you click over here. If you want it over there, you go over there. So there's no need to click and drag this playhead around. Just click where you want it to go, and it goes there right away. It's very obedient. So that's the viewer showing you your clips, segments in the timeline, and then down here is the timeline. And this is where the magic happens, where you edit your project and it all starts to come together. And so these are very pretty standardized among video editors. You're going to see something like this. The text talks a little bit about having another window here just for looking at your clips and pictures from your browser. And that's a little bit more standard in terms of like Avid and Premiere and other video editing software tends to have another window here. And Final Cut has just kind of incorporated that window into the browser to a degree, which is fine. Not necessarily better or worse. It is a little. It does kind of throw editors who are used to having a separate window here, and so if Final Cut X is the first software that you've worked in, just be aware that the other software will be a little bit different, and it'll take a little time to get used to it. Avid will be insanely different, but Premiere will be a little bit closer. So those are the three main windows, and then all editors have ways of changing how you view your clips, especially in the browser here. So we can choose between film strip view, where you can see your clips displayed as film strips and scroll through them this way, and list view, where you can click on a clip and then scroll. It'll pop up on top and you can scroll through it that way. This is the way I prefer, and but it will depend on your preferences. Maybe as a beginner you prefer film strip view. Maybe that feels a little bit more natural to you to start working that way. But typically this is how a lot of the editing is done, is in list view. It makes it easier for you to click on things and rename them if you want to, or you can scroll over here to the other columns. For example, I've changed the camera angle column to wide, and you can add notes, and you can change roles, which we'll talk about in a second here in the timeline. And these, by the way, like for example, I added camera angle. I don't think that's by default, or maybe it was roles. That's not by default when you fire up Final Cut. So you can right click or control click if you don't have a right mouse button on your Mac, and then you can go through and scroll through and decide which ones that you want in there. So I just selected roles. I can turn roles. Let's turn notes off. So you generally, as beginning editors, you're probably not going to be too concerned with this, but as you get to be more professional or working with larger projects where you've got a lot of assets that you're trying to keep organized, it can be very helpful to incorporate some of these additional columns and start entering information. So it makes it easier for you to find things, like, even just, well, notes, which I just just removed. You can go in there and type a few notes about a clip, and then you can search through Final Cut for that particular clip when you want to find it. And then also down here, we can adjust some settings for the timeline. So we can either have just audio waveforms, which what are audio waveforms? Well, audio waveforms are a picture of your audio intensity. It doesn't tell you much more than how loud it is, but the higher the peak, the louder the audio. And the reason audio waveforms are really nice is they allow you to literally see your sound if you want to do some really fine-tuned editing. So let's say, this is a cough right here or something I want to eliminate. I can go and find that exact sound and cut it out in a more seamless manner so that it could potentially just disappear without the audience knowing. So there's a lot of times where it's handy to be able to see audio waveforms and do some really precise editing with your audio. Also, just as a side note, typically when I'm editing a video, long or short video, it doesn't really matter, the first thing I worry about is the sound. And I don't really worry about the video or the pictures. In fact, a lot of times I'll have the video turned off because I don't really care. For example, if I'm editing a short 5-minute video with a bunch of interviews, I don't really care about seeing the talking heads. There's nothing, typically there's nothing about their face that's going to affect whether or not I edit at a certain point. It all has to do with what they're saying. It's all about the audio. So generally, in a first edit, we call that a radio edit because it's just the sound that we're worrying about. We're making sure that our video sounds good, flows nicely audio-wise, and once that's set, we're happy where everything is and how it sounds, then we'll turn on the video and start worrying about the picture side of things. So it's possible that you might want to start your editing just with this, just looking at the audio waveforms. But Final Cut gives you other options where you can get tiny little thumbnails of your video until you get larger and larger, and then you have just your video with no audio, which is fine too, especially for later on or beginning editor. This can make it really easy for you to locate particular clips in your timeline. And then we have this feature where it's just the text from your clip with no video thumbnails or audio waveform. And one nice thing about this is maybe you don't need that information, so you can eliminate it. But why do that? Well, one of the reasons that it can be nice to just have text, besides being able to more easily read the text or with other information you might have attached to these, it also, I think you can see my computer seems to be processing it a little bit faster. If we go to full clips, you can see maybe a little bit, takes it a little bit longer to catch up with me than if we're here. Maybe a slight difference. But anytime you're asking the computer to create more pictures, you're bogging it down a little bit more. So if your computer is running a little bit slow, that might be one thing that you try and turn off. That might speed things up a little bit. You can adjust clip height here if you want to make things really huge or smaller. And typically that depends on how many different levels of video or audio you're working with. If you're trying to mess with a whole bunch of different stuff, you've got video track with a whole bunch of audio and music and that sort of thing, and maybe you've got videos and graphics on top of it, then you want to make it smaller. But you can adjust that depending on how many levels of video you're trying to mess with. And then down here, if I switch this view, it makes it a little bit clearer. You can choose if you want to view clip names or angles, if you have an angle indicated for your clips, which again you would be doing here in the browser, or to clip rolls. And you can, again in the browser, you can choose what you want the rolls for each clip to be, but in this case the default is video and dialogue. And that can make it a little easier for you to identify the types of video you're looking at. It's just defaults to dialogue. It's not actually really dialogue. It's just sound, not necessarily people talking. But you can go and customize that for each clip in the browser if you want. And so those are some things you can adjust there in your timeline, changing the clip appearance. And then you also have options to have more than 3 windows, as the text talks about. So you can open up the inspector, and the nice thing about this is it makes it easy for you to quickly make changes to any video that you happen to have selected in the timeline. So if I want to change the scale of this, actually I already have it at 160%, but we can change the scale of that clip rather easily. We can crop things if we want to crop the video. Let's see if it'll catch up with me here. There we go. So we can do some kind of nice basic changes to your videos here in the inspector. And so that's one option. And then if you've added effects or other things like that, you can quickly modify them here too. So this is a window that there might be times in editing you want to have it open and other times you don't. Depends on, when you're just beginning on a project, you probably don't really need this open. When you're just doing very basic editing, kind of putting the bones of your video together. And then as you're getting further in and maybe fine-tuning things a bit more, you could have that open. And then they also suggest the effects window here is another one that you might want to open, and actually it can be any one of these different options. So these are different effects that you can grab and drag onto a clip if you want, and then you can see that change apply, and you can scroll through these to look at, and then there's audio options too, and then we have pictures. If you have pictures from photo booth, it's me and I think my dog, I don't know what that is. Oh, that's yeah, anyway. If you have photos that you want to bring in, you can mess with those there. Sounds, we have Apple Loops here that you can use various sounds that come with the software. And then transitions, these are how we transition from one shot to another. Typically we just do a dissolve, but you can also, you see as I mouse over, you get a little preview of what these are, so you can get an arrow transition, and you can see we're transitioning from trees to more trees basically, but water. And so these are some options for you. I would like to caution you that just because cool effects exist in Final Cut doesn't mean that you have to use them. There should be some reason that you're applying these effects beyond just the fact that you think they're cool, which is fine. As a beginning editor, you want to go have a ball adding lens flares and light noise and ridiculous checker wipes to your video just because you can. That's fine. But recognize that is a as a beginner phase, and once you become more professional, you need to put that period behind you and stick with transitions that for some reason that makes sense. Most of the time it's just dissolve. Wipes are kind of nice when we will use them occasionally. We'll talk about this later. Then we have titles, and there's some preset titles that you can make too, so you can enter in your text and Final Cut will animate it for you. And then we have some other generators. Anytime you see generator in an editor, that basically means that the editor is going to make something for you. So here's a whole host of things that Final Cut will generate for you, including a curtain and blobs and things like that. And then here we have some more templates, and these are some pre-made things that can look cool. I will say the problem is that a lot of these can get overused, and so it's gotten to the point with some editors that come with presets that I can identify that, I see you made that in Final Cut Pro because you're using the diagonal video transition, which everybody who has Final Cut X knows. And it's particularly worse with some of the audio that's come along with these applications. People will just find the few really good usable audio clips that come with the editors and use that for their music, and then it becomes like, oh, very obvious what software application you're using. But anyway, those are a couple other windows that you can add, or you can turn them off. And again, it will likely depend on the stage of editing that you're in, if you have those windows open or not. And then the chapter ends with talking about setting up a second display. And I'm just going to assume that if you have a second display, that you can figure that out. I'm not going to worry about explaining that to most of you who I imagine don't have a second display. But I will talk a little bit about why it's nice to have a second display. And one of the main reasons for that is because, as you can see, the editing software itself takes up a lot of desktop real estate. And so if you can move any one of these big parts to another monitor and free up that space on this monitor, then it just gives you a little bit more room to see things, like have a little bit more space for your browser or more space for your timeline, that kind of thing. So generally, if you give me a second browser, probably second monitor, the first thing I would do is probably move my browser over there so I can see everything in this window easily and sort through all my footage. And I do have a 2-monitor setup at work, so it's nice to have, maybe my viewer and my timeline in one monitor and my browser in the other. It kind of depends on where things are going, but typically you like to have these two together, so if you make a change here, you can see it there right away. Although sometimes people use a second monitor just for playing just for their viewer, just for seeing their timeline, and that's fine too. Particularly professionals will have a monitor that's a professional monitor that's configured just perfectly so that they can see really accurate color and contrast for the videos that they're working on, rather than just what comes on computers. So yeah, those are some reasons why you might want a second monitor. I wouldn't run out and get one if you don't have one already. But if you are serious about video editing, it might be a useful investment, but it all depends. I don't know that just because you have a second monitor you're going to be significantly better at editing than someone who doesn't have one, but you might be a little bit faster. So those are my notes on the second chapter. If you have any questions about anything, let me know. Thanks.